Okay, good morning. Sorry, I'm running a bit late. Sam was as well. I got a call from Sam saying he's running late, and I said, yeah, I'm running late too. So just arrived a few minutes ago. It might be a living parable because we're talking about the second coming and delay. So, but it wasn't planned, I can assure you. I was feverishly finishing the sermon. And the audio visuals as well. Anyway, good to be here at Fantry Gully as always. When I was young, I was a teenager, and when I was young as a teenager, skateboards came out for the first time. Okay, they've come back in waves and things like that. When I was a teenager, it was the first time that they came out, and they were a big deal. Everybody wanted a skateboard, including myself as well. And so I saved up my bickies and bought a skateboard, and had many enjoyable times on it. One day I went down the street and hit a stone. And when you hit a stone on a skateboard, the skateboard stops, but you continue. And I continued, and I landed on my hands, like a handstand at speed, of course. And I was in absolute agony. And so I went home, sort of just trying to hold onto the skateboard with the pain. And I got home, I told Mum, look, I've fallen off my skateboard, and I think I need to go to the hospital and get some x-rays. And unfortunately, I was the family hypochondriac. And we had been to the hospital before for x-rays, and each time they were only sprains. And so Mum said, oh, look, I think you'll be right. I said, no, Mum, I think I'm really not well. I'm really in a lot of pain. I said, oh, well, we'll wait and see tomorrow. I said, Mum, I really am. But anyway, nobody was listening to me. That night I couldn't even lie down in bed. I just was sitting up. I was sitting in the bed, just propping myself in the corner between the bed head and the wall. I was just moaning in pain. Anyway, in the morning, I said to Mum, look, I think I really need to go to the hospital. I haven't slept. I said, no, I think you'll be right. Mum was a nurse. So she just put a couple of slings, the triangle slings. I'm going like this to school. And of course, teenagers, when you're like this, it's a magnet for kids to hit you. And that's exactly what happened. Hey, Paul, did you fall off your skateboard? Yeah. And so I'm in absolute agony with all of this, and I'm trying to do my work with the slings and getting hit. And I got home. I said, look, Mum, I think I really better go to the hospital. It said, okay, we'll go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital, had an x-ray. I had 2 broken elbows and 1 broken wrist. So I had the wrist put in the cast, and I had to wear like this for the broken elbows for about 4 to 6 weeks to sort of heal the broken elbows. Mum and Dad felt so guilty. I milked it for all it was worth. And then at school, got the sympathy of the chicks. I milked that for all that was worth as well. But yeah, crying wolf, and the experience that cost me quite a deal of pain. I'd like to ask a question. Have we sometimes cried wolf about the signs of Christ's return? Have we looked too much to headlines and then said, yes, Jesus is coming soon because of this headline or that headline? I remember as a young boy, as you do when you're an Adventist young boy, you go to the evangelistic series, and we would be regaled with all the wars and pestilences and all the bad things happening in the world. And then they'd bring up the latest scary headlines Sometimes I was travelling back from Box Hill to East Burwood. I thought we wouldn't make it home because Jesus was going to return so quickly. And I think others have experienced that same thing as well. But now I'm 63, I'm not a kid anymore. And Jesus still hasn't returned. Still hasn't returned. So anyway, having a sermon series, as I like to do, and this sermon series is on Matthew chapters 24 and 25. So I'll be looking at those two chapters mainly for this series. It should take us out till the end of the year, would be my guess, but you can never tell because they're not written yet. And so in this one, we're going to be looking at the sign of Christ's return. And you're probably saying, no, Paul, it's signs of Christ's return in Matthew 24. Is it? Is it? Is that what it says? So looking at that today, Matthew chapter 24, 4 to verses 36, see what Jesus actually says about the sign of his return. What does he actually say? Now, it might be a little bit different to what we've perhaps always thought. But anyway, let's have a look at the evidence. But the most important part, and the part Jesus actually concentrated on in 24 and 25, is how to live. How to live until he returns. And that's the bulk of what he is saying in 24 and 25, even though the disciples didn't ask about that. Jesus spoke mostly about how to live. And so we'll be looking at how to be ready. I don't like the term getting ready for Jesus' return. Okay? We're either ready or we're not. Okay? There's no getting ready. We either are or we aren't. So I'm going to be using the term in this series, how to be ready for Jesus' return, not how to get ready for Jesus' return. I prefer that sort of terminology. Okay, let's dive into it. This might be a little bit different to what we're used to. But anyway, let's see how we go. Matthew 24, 1 to 3. Okay, thank you, Kwame, for the scripture reading. We'll have a look at it again. Matthew 24, verses 1 to 3. Because this really sets the scene for chapters 24 and 25. As Jesus was leaving the temple grounds, his disciples pointed out to him the various temple buildings. But he responded, "Do you see all these buildings? I tell you the truth, they will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another." Later, Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives. His disciples came to him privately and said, "Tell us, when will all this happen? What sign will signal your return and the end of the world?" This is a very poignant scene, in fact. Disciples probably didn't know it. This was Jesus' last trip from the temple. He would never go to the temple again. His preaching ministry was over. And his disciples were pointing out the beautiful building, not completed yet. It was Herod's grand rebuilding program, and it was, for all of Herod's faults, he was a great builder. Now, whether he was like Donald Trump, well, we won't go there, okay? But Herod was a builder, and he was building the temple. And it was still a glorious building, even if it was a bit unfinished. And so they're pointing out to Jesus, look at this beautiful temple building. And then Jesus would have shocked them with his answer. Not one stone will be left upon another. This was something that would have been quite shocking to them, something that was so permanent and was being built in such a beautiful way with such beautiful materials. But anyway, that's what Jesus had said. So it was so shocking for them. They didn't even question him there. They didn't, because that was a pretty radical thing to say, that the temple would be destroyed. So they only came to him privately when they were on Mount of Olives. Then they privately asked him about what he was saying. And so they asked him, "Tell us, when will all this happen?" Okay? Tell us when all this will happen. Now, I'm not going to be looking at this question in particular because that relates to the destruction of Jerusalem. And even though chapter 24 sort of intermingles the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple and the second coming, this question relates mainly to when will the temple be destroyed. I'm interested when we're looking more at the next one, where he says, when they ask him privately, tell us when all this will happen, what sign will signal your return and the end of the world? Okay, so that question is clearly related to the second coming and the end of the world. So I'm actually going to divide it into two questions, okay? That one question that they asked, I'll divide it into two, okay? What sign, which is singular, by the way, okay, it's singular, it's not plural signs, it's a singular sign. What sign will signal your return? Okay, so that's the answer we're looking for, okay, to the question that they asked. And the second question, and the end of the world, okay? We're looking at those two questions. How does Jesus answer them? Because he will, okay? He will answer them very, very clearly. There won't be any ambiguity or anything like that. He answers these two questions very, very clearly. But maybe not in a way that we are used to. And so, this is a bit of my study over quite a few years. So we'll see what Jesus had to say about these two questions. And we're going to go right through Matthew, to the end, to verse 36. Okay, not skipping anything, not jumping around here and there. Let's see what Jesus actually said about the sign, singular, of his return and the end of the world. Okay, so let's continue reading. Verse 4 of Matthew chapter 24. Jesus told them, don't let anyone mislead you. Very short verse. That's how Jesus started out. Don't let anyone mislead you. And this is a theme throughout chapter 24. Being deceived, being misled. So he starts off with a warning, okay? They've asked for, signs and when and whatever, but Jesus answers, don't be misled. Okay, that shows it was pretty important in Jesus' mind not to be misled. Verse 5, be misled in what? For many will come in my name claiming, I am the Messiah. They will deceive many. I am the Messiah. That will deceive many. There have been false messiahs all through history, okay, all through history, since, especially at the time of Jesus' first coming. Okay, messiahs were a dime a dozen. Okay, and then throughout history there have been messiahs as well, or false messiahs, of course. Probably the most recent well-known one was David Koresh, who said he was a messiah. He was the sinful Messiah in his eyes. Now, he certainly got the sinful part right, but the Messiah part wrong. So these false messiahs will be throughout history. Okay, it's not really a unique sign because they just appear, say, from the time of Jesus' birth right to the end of time as well. Okay, verses 6 to 8. And you will hear of wars and threats of wars, but don't panic. Yes, these things must take place, but the end won't follow immediately. Nations will go to war against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in many parts of the world. All this is only the first of the birth pains, with more to come. Now, it's interesting for these, what often called signs, wars, rumours of wars, nation against nation, all of these sort of things, famines and pestilences. Jesus gave the warning, these are not the end. He specifically says it, this is not the end. This is the beginning. These things are going to happen before I return. So he still hasn't really answered the question about either signs or the end of the world. These are not part of it. Now, those of us who may be used to these things as being signs, we've actually in our history knew that they weren't. They weren't. James White, one of our pioneers, back in the 19th century, this is what he had to say. He said, the sacred writers have so uniformly associated such judgments as war, famine, pestilence, and earthquake with the last judgment, that the disciples would be in danger of concluding that the end would immediately follow the great appearance of these calamities. Hence the caution given. These things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Okay? Let that sink in. He said, these sort of things that Jesus described, the disciples would have thought that's the end, okay? Because these things were associated with judgments, and I'll be having a look at that later in the Old Testament. So after saying these things, Jesus said, well, no, this is not the end, because they would have thought that, hearing these things, because that's how judgments worked. All of these things would happen. And so, even in the 19th century, one of our pioneers said, no, these are not signs. And Jesus specifically said it because he knew that the listeners, his disciples, would have associated these things with the end. So he said, no. Okay, he continues. Mark this, our Lord does not mention wars, famines, pestilence, and earthquakes as signs of his second advent, but rather as events of common occurrence all the way through the Christian age, which must exist before the end. Now, they will be at the end, okay? I'm not saying they won't. They definitely will be. But they'll be throughout the history, not just at the end, which must exist before the end. And history attests the fact that these calamities have covered at least 17 centuries. So he said, just look at history and you'll see all of those things have happened. So they cannot be signs. They will be at the end, but they're not signs of the end because that's what happens all the way through. Now, this comes from, it says there, the second coming of Christ, or a brief exposition of Matthew 24. Now, James White had a different idea to brief, probably more in line with my idea of brief. It was actually 46 single-typed A4 pages long. Okay, that's his brief exposition on Matthew 24. So I don't feel so bad with my brief sermons. So these are not signs of the end. And this will be clear later on, okay? This will be clear later on. But I'm just saying, even in our history, it was recognised that these weren't actually signs of the end, contrary to perhaps how many people have been presenting it since then. Okay, let's continue reading verses 9 and 10 of Matthew 24. Then you will be arrested, persecuted, and killed. You'll be hated all over the world because you are my followers. And many will turn away from me and betray and hate each other. Okay, persecution of Christians is predicted. Again, this has happened all through history, okay, including today. There's very much, not so much in our country, but in many countries, Christians are terribly persecuted. Obviously, we're not often aware of what is going on. But persecution has happened basically since Jesus left, or even before. Okay, he was persecuted. So these are, being persecuted is not a unique sign. It's something that has happened all through history, Christian history, including to the end. Okay, so it will be happening at the end, but it is not a unique sign. Verse 11. And many false prophets will appear and will deceive many people. Okay, this is warning number 2 about false prophets and false messiahs or false messiahs. Warning number 2. Jesus really nailing this about, hey, don't be deceived. There's going to be false prophets and things like that. Now, the only minor detail is Jesus hasn't told the true, how we'll recognise the true. the true second coming and the true Messiah, but he's given 2 warnings against false messiahs. Okay, verse 12. Sin will be rampant everywhere, and the love of many will go cold. Okay, again, sin has been running rampant pretty much since the beginning of time. Okay, nothing really unusual there. The world has gone through many wicked cycles and things like that. So again, not something that is unique to the end, but something that will be at the end and also leading up to the end as well. Okay, verse 13. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. So here amongst all of these things is a call for endurance. And as Christians, of course, that's what we want to do. We want to endure to the end. And Jesus says, and then the person who endures to the end will be saved. And so that's, as Christians, what we are called to do, to endure. Okay, verse 14. And the good news about the kingdom will be preached throughout the world so that all nations will hear it, and then the end will come. Here's the answer to one of the questions. Isn't it? Very clear. Okay, well, the 2 questions were, what sign will signal your return? But the second one, and the end of the world. Jesus answers that in 24:14. And the good news about the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world so that all the nations will hear it, and then the end will come. Okay, so that's one of the questions answered. Okay, the question was at the end of the world. Jesus answers that very clearly. Okay, there's no mistaking. He's using that language of the end of the world. So the end of the world cannot take place until the gospel has gone to all the world. Okay? But this is still not a sign, because Jesus doesn't use the word sign here, does he? He just simply says the gospel will go to the all world and then the end will come. And we'll be having a look at that in the next sermon. So we've got one of those 2 questions answered directly by Jesus. Okay, we don't have to study the Greek and anything like that. Very clear. They asked, what's the end of the world? Jesus said, the gospel goes to all the world, then the end will come. Okay, so not before. So far, he's told the disciples what will be happening throughout the age. Okay, he hasn't really given any specific sign yet. He's just talking about what will be happening. But here he says, clearly, the end will come when the gospel has gone to all the world. So there's one definitely distinct answer. Okay, we'll continue 15 to 20. The day is coming when you will see what Daniel the prophet spoke about, the sacrilegious object that causes desecration standing in the holy place. Reader, pay attention. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills. A person out on the deck of a roof must go down into the house to pack. Must not go down into the house to pack. A person out in the field must not return even to get a coat. How terrible it will be for pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. And pray that your flight will not be in winter or on the Sabbath. Now, I'm not going to dwell too much on this because this is really relating to the fall of Jerusalem. Okay, this section. Okay, this is mainly, well, almost exclusively about the fall of Jerusalem. Okay, there's obviously some aspects of fleeing at the end of time, but this was mainly about the fall of Jerusalem. Okay, the parallel passage in Luke talks about when when you see the armies around Jerusalem. Okay, that's the time to flee. So, and this passage actually saved the Christians, because when the Romans suddenly withdrew, the Christians saw it as a sign to flee, and so they did. So, this is really relating more to that, and so we'll continue and keep looking. We still haven't seen Jesus answer the question about the sign. Verses 21 and 22. Okay, but it's interesting that Jesus still talks about the Sabbath. So the Sabbath was something that was going to continue even after he had left. 21 and 22, for there will be greater anguish than at any time since the world began, and it will never be so great again. In fact, unless that time of calamity is shortened, not a single person will survive, but it will be shortened for the sake of God's chosen ones. Okay, so here it talks about a great time of trouble, okay, but it's still not a sign. It's still not a sign, just simply saying there will be great trouble. In fact, so much trouble that nobody would survive. Nobody at all on the earth, but they will be shortened for the sake of God's people. Not the most thought to think about that things are going to get a whole lot worse. But that's what Jesus predicted. It'll be a time such as never been before or since. Okay, we'll continue reading 23 to 26. Okay, here we go again. Then, if anyone tells you, look, here is the Messiah, or there he is, don't believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will rise up and perform great signs and wonders, so as to deceive, if possible, even God's chosen ones. See, I've warned you about this ahead of time. So if someone tells you, look, the Messiah is out in the desert, don't bother to go there. Or look, he is hiding here, don't believe it. So again, a third warning about false messiahs and false prophets. Jesus is really emphasizing this point. Don't believe, don't go looking even for the false prophets and false messiahs. Which of course begs the question, well, how do we tell the true one? It's one thing to say, don't go after the false ones, but how do we know the true one? Okay, Jesus now starts to give a bit of a hint in verse 27. For as the lightning flashes in the east and shines in the west, so it will be when the Son of Man comes. Okay, up until now, Jesus has been mainly intermingling the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 and the second coming. But now the focus is much more on the end. And so he's saying, okay, here's how you know about the Messiah. Okay, that it'll be like light, be visible like lightning from east to west, not in a secret place, not out in the desert, none of those things. It'll be like lightning from the east and the west. And then he talks a bit of a cryptic saying that we don't really know much about. Verse 28, just as the gathering of vultures shows there is a carcass nearby, so these signs indicate that the end is near. Now, I don't know why the NLT is the only version that adds that sentence at the end, so these signs indicate that the end is near. It's not actually in any of the originals, and probably in your Bibles, if you don't have an NLT, it's not there. It just simply says, just as the gathering of the vultures shows there is a carcass nearby. Okay, and that's all it says. So, that talk about signs is just simply not there. They obviously added that in as their own commentary. And so this saying, it could mean that, hey, don't go out into the desert because those prophets are not true. Okay, and so it's like vultures around a dead body. Okay, don't go out into the desert. Wait for the real Messiah to come. Okay, verses 29 and 30. Verse 29. Immediately after the anguish of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will give no light. The stars will fall from the skies, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. This part of Matthew 24 is talking about immediately before Jesus returns. Hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened yet. Okay, it's immediately. If you see in the next verse, it's talking about the coming of Jesus. These things have not happened yet. Now I know, some of you are saying, "Oh, what about the dark day and the dark night and the stars from heaven?" Those things happened over 200 years ago. They're hardly signs of Christ's return or anything like that. Also, they were 53 years apart, okay, between the dark day and the falling of the stars. That's hardly can be a fulfillment of this. So what is happening here? What is this talking about? Okay, what this is talking about, this is the language of the day of the Lord in the Old Testament. Okay, day of the Lord had these elements when the Bible talks about the day of the Lord, and I'll show you quite a few of them. It'll be surprising. When the disciples heard this, they would be thinking, this is the day of the Lord. This is really the end now, because the Old Testament used this sort of language. Let's have a look at some of the passages. Isaiah 13:9-10. For see, the day of the Lord is coming, the terrible day of his fury and fierce anger. The land will be made desolate, and all the sinners will be destroyed in it. The heavens will be black above them, the stars will give no light, the sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will provide no light. Okay, see the parallels with Matthew 24. Very much day of the Lord. And this is what Jesus is tapping into, day of the Lord imagery. Not something that's happened in the past. This is something that will be happening in our future. Okay, another one. Joel 2:10-11. The earth quakes as they advance, and the heavens tremble. The sun and the moon grow dark, and the stars no longer shine. The Lord is at the head of the column. He leads them with a shout. This is the mighty army, and they follow his orders. The day of the Lord is an awesome, terrible thing. Who can possibly survive? Okay, day of the Lord imagery. Another one. Joel 2:31, the sun will become dark and the moon will turn blood red before the great and terrible day of the Lord arrives. Okay, day of the Lord imagery. Joel 3:14-16, thousands upon thousands are waiting in the valley of decision. There the day of the Lord will soon arrive. The sun and moon will grow dark and the stars will no longer shine. The Lord's voice will roar from Zion and thunder from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth will shake. Okay? Another one. Amos 8:8-9. The earth will tremble for your deeds and everyone will mourn. The ground will rise like the Nile River at flood time. It will heave and then sink again in that day. I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth while it was still day. Okay, do you get the picture? Okay, day of the Lord imagery in Matthew 24. It's not talking about what happened a couple of hundred years ago, 53 years apart. No, this is day of the Lord imagery. Okay, now we are really getting close. Now, also, we see the same in Revelation. Okay, the book of Revelation. The sixth seal, which is the second coming of Jesus, is the sixth seal. I watched as the Lamb broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake. The sun became as dark as black cloth, and the moon became as red as blood. Then the stars of the sky fell to the earth, and like green figs falling from a tree shaken by a strong wind. The sky was rolled up like a scroll, and all the mountains and islands were moved from their places. Okay, earthquakes. Then everyone, the kings of the earth, the rulers, the generals, the wealthy, the powerful, and every slave and free person, all hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they cried to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of the one who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to survive? So in both the Old and the New Testament, we're looking, in Matthew 24, we're looking at day of the Lord imagery. Okay, just before Jesus returns. Okay, here's a comparison between the two. Oh boy, what happened there? Okay, sun darkened in Matthew 24:29 and in Revelation. Okay, the moon darkened or blood-like, Matthew 24:29 and Revelation 6:12. Okay, stars falling, Matthew 24:29 and Revelation 16:13. The heavens shaken, the sky removed. Matthew 24:29, powers of earth and heaven shaken, the sky vanished like a scroll rolled up. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Human terror, all the tribes of the earth will mourn, Matthew 24:30, Revelation 6:15 to 16. People hide in caves and cry out for rocks to fall on them. The appearing of Christ, then in 24:30, then will appear the sign of the Son of Man, and they'll see the Son of Man coming. Revelation 16:16, hide us from the face of him and from the Lamb. Judgment arrives. 31, he'll send out his angels, gather his elect. 16, Revelation, the great day of their wrath has come. Global scope, 24:30, all the tribes of the earth. Revelation 16:15, kings, great ones, rich, powerful, slave, and free. Okay, so in my mind, and I'm far from the only one, Jesus was talking about day of the Lord imagery right at the end of tribulation, at the end of the earth, before he returns. Okay, let's see what happens next in verses 30 and 31. Okay, and then at last what? What's the word there? And then at last, the sign. The sign. Exactly the same word as what the disciples asked. Exactly the same word. This is the sign of Christ's return. After that, at last, okay, after then, the sign, at last, the sign that the Son of Man is coming will appear in the heavens, and there will be deep mourning among all the peoples of the earth, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a mighty blast of a trumpet, and they will gather his chosen ones from all over the world, from the farthest ends of the earth and heaven. So here we see the answer to the second question, or one of the questions. What sign will signal your return? Jesus answers it in 24:30 and 31. Then at last the sign that the Son of Man is coming will appear in the heavens. Basically, the sign is Jesus returning. That's the sign in Matthew 24. It's not earthquakes, it's not wars, it's not famines, none of those things are signs. Jesus was simply describing what was going to happen until he returns. And so he said, this is the only sign, is him actually returning, the second coming. And so we've got the two answers, the answers to the two questions that they asked. What sign? Singular. Okay, remember, it was singular that they asked, and Jesus answered in the singular. Okay, he didn't answer in the plural, he actually answered in the singular. This is the sign that the Son of Man is coming. He'll appear in the clouds, and all the angels. Okay, and the second question, the end of the world, when the good news about the kingdom is preached throughout the world, and then the end will come. So in Matthew chapter 24, these are the signs of the sign when Jesus returned, when he actually comes. But the end of the world is when the good news goes throughout the world. And so we'll be having a look at that in our next sermon. So, this is all. Jesus says a lot of things, but these are the only two things that count in terms of the sign of his return and what will mark the end of the world, which is the gospel going to all the world. Okay, let's continue what Jesus had to say. Verse 32. Now learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that the summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, you can know that his return is very near, even at the door. So the question is, okay, what things is he will show the end? Okay, probably what it's referring to is the what's happening in verse 29. Okay, the thunder, the earthquakes, the sun, the dark, Okay, saying those things. When you see those things, you know it's at the door. Jesus coming immediately after that. Okay, after all of those things. So there's a prelude before he returns. And that is all of these things happening. Sun dark and moon giving no light. Okay, so Jesus is saying, because he says it's right at the door when those things happen, which is true. Because we saw in Revelation, those things happened pretty much together. And then verse 34, it says, I tell you the truth, this generation will not pass from the scene until all these things take place. Now this can have, this obviously passage has troubled many people because obviously that generation has passed away and Jesus hasn't returned. But there's at least a couple of explanations. Okay, let's go to Matthew 23, 34 to 38. Matthew 23, just the page back, 34 to 38. Okay, this is Jesus in the temple for the last time. Therefore, I am sending you prophets and wise men and teachers of religious law, but you will kill some by crucifixion, and you will flog others with whips in your synagogues, chasing them from city to city. As a result, you will be held responsible for the murder of all the godly people of all time, from the murder of righteous Abel to the murder of Zacharias, son of Berechiah, whom you killed in the temple between the sanctuary and the altar. I tell you the truth, this judgment will fall on this very generation. So Jesus could have, when he said this generation won't pass away, could have been referring to the destruction of Jerusalem. Because here he says, this judgment is going to fall on this generation. And certainly some people who were there listening to him would have been also in the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay, so there's that aspect as well. There could be referring to this. But when he says in Matthew 24 and verse, where is it? Until all these things take place, it could be referring more to the destruction of Jerusalem, because certainly there was some who were in the audience who would have been affected by that. But anyway, that's just something to think about. Or it could be that those that see those things in verse 20, 24, 29, the sun darkened and the moon, they'll see the second coming of Christ. But possibly it's more referring to the destruction of Jerusalem, seeing as Jesus previously talked about that, that the judgment would fall on that generation. Okay, verse 35 of Matthew 24. So back over the page. Heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. Jesus emphasizing that the things he has said in Matthew 24 and probably 23 as well, that they will come true. They will not disappear. Heaven and earth would disappear before his words before his words would ever disappear. And then in verse 36, we're finishing up. However, no one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows. And so this is, of course, a warning against date setting, that only the Father knows. In fact, in some manuscripts, it doesn't even say that the Son doesn't know. It's not all manuscripts have that. The Son doesn't know, so maybe Jesus does know. Maybe did know then. So some manuscripts have it, some manuscripts don't. Now, what I'm presenting today is obviously probably a little bit different to what many of us have heard, including myself. And so I was really struggling writing this sermon, actually. I'm thinking, oh dear. But anyway, I'm presenting it to you. You can study yourself and see what you think. And I sort of thought it was a pretty friendless interpretation, although a few people had pointed out that the gospel going to all the world and then the end will come. That has been emphasised, but Not so much about the one sign, that the only sign in Matthew 24 is actually Jesus returning, and the stars and the dark day and all that are in the future rather than the past. That's probably a little bit different. But anyway, up until yesterday, I thought I might be one of the only ones or the few that was looking at this interpretation, okay? But I found something in the Andrews Study Bible, okay, which is by Andrews University. Okay, so obviously one of our publications. And this is what it says in the Andrews Study Bible. Okay, I kid you not. In this chapter, Jesus lists a number of events that have commonly been interpreted as signs or indicators that the second coming is near. These include turmoil, religious, political, military, natural disasters, hostility towards the disciples, apostasy, dissipation, and the proclamation of the gospel. Okay, so it continues. Jesus, however, said most of these are not indicators that the end has arrived. Sure. There's definitely a not there, okay? You can look it up. There's a not there. These are not indicators the end has arrived. These events are not intended to tell us the specific time of the second coming, but to remind us of the reality of that coming, okay? The reality of it, not the timing of it. Two events could be seen as more precise signs: the gospel preached in the entire world, verse 14, and the actual second coming, which is the only event specifically called a sign. So, phew, I didn't read this till yesterday. I'm not sure it was morning or afternoon, but man, I've got one of these newfangled watches, and I think my heart rate dropped 20 points when I read that. So it seems like there's some movement about Matthew 24. It made it into the Andrews Study Bible. Now, they'll probably only confirm to conservatives how liberal they are, but anyway, I came to the conclusion myself. Okay, I didn't know this till yesterday. I didn't read it, so I quickly copied and pasted it. You can be sure of that. So yeah, it's a little bit different, and of course, there's other passages in the Bible that talk about Jesus' return and things like that. But in Matthew 24, we have to be a little bit honest with what Jesus said. There was two clear questions and two very clear answers. And so, we need to take that seriously. So anyway, we're going to look in a little bit more detail about the gospel going to all the world and some other things. And then we'll continue and we'll be looking at the rest of 24 and 25 of how to be ready, which is Jesus' emphasis. Okay? It's Jesus' emphasis, not just mine, about how to be ready for his return. Jesus was pretty enigmatic. Whenever people were talking about timing, he would be very enigmatic. Jesus was very much downplaying, try to know the time. Okay, just before he left, his disciples asked, "Is now the time?" What did he say? Mind your own business, okay? Do your work, okay? Don't worry about it. So this was not his emphasis. Sometimes, unfortunately, as Christians, it's our emphasis, but it wasn't Jesus. Jesus' emphasis was how to live while waiting for his return. So anyway, I want to finish on a positive note. Okay, Isaiah 25:9. In that day, the people will proclaim, "This is our God. We trusted in him, and he saved us. This is the Lord in whom we trusted. Let us rejoice in the salvation he brings." Okay, I now have our